No one could say exactly when it started. The first reports appeared as scattered rumors on the internet, anonymous posts on obscure forums describing a dream that repeated itself night after night. It was always the same landscape, a city with no name, full of buildings that seemed to defy the laws of physics, illuminated by a cold, bluish light. There were no sounds, just an inexplicable feeling of immensity. For some, the dream brought an overwhelming peace. For others, a silent terror that stayed with them even after they woke up. At first, it all seemed like just a coincidence, an unimportant collective delirium. But then patterns emerged. People from different parts of the world began to describe the same details. The posts increased exponentially. Psychologists tried to explain how an unknown archetype could be spreading through the collective unconscious, while conspiracy theorists talked about government experiments and subliminal transmissions. But the phenomenon was not limited to the internet. Doctors began receiving patients with unusual symptoms, mental confusion, difficulty concentrating, and a growing apathy, as if some of them had never fully awoken from their last sleep. Diego was an investigative journalist, used to strange phenomena. His instincts told him that there was something there besides rumors and exaggerations. He began tracking down the first reports, interviewing people who claimed to have had the same dream. The similarities were disturbing. Even those who had never met described the blue city in identical detail. At first, Diego thought it was all just a psychological effect, a collective hysteria amplified by social media. But the truth was far from that. The situation escalated rapidly. Reports of people no longer being able to differentiate between dreams and reality began to emerge. Some forgot moments from the day before, as if their memories were being replaced. Others were in a trance-like state, staring into the void, mumbling meaningless phrases. Diego heard of a case in which a man was found wandering the streets, trying to open doors that didn't exist, searching for a way out that only made sense in his dream. What was most frightening was the way the outbreak was spreading. It was no ordinary virus, transmitted by contact or through the air. It was spread by words, by images, by the very idea of the dream. Just hearing the description of the place seemed to be enough to implant it in someone's mind. Those who tried to understand the phenomenon were the first to fall. The government began to take action, deleting mentions of the dream on the internet, blocking discussions, and denying reports. But the information had already spread like wildfire. One night, after interviewing a woman whose husband had disappeared forever into the world of dreams, Diego felt the weight of exhaustion bear down on him. Since the start of the investigation, he had hardly slept. But when he finally closed his eyes, he found himself in the Blue City. It was grander and more terrifying than any description he had heard. The buildings seemed to change shape when he tried to focus on them. Something on the horizon pulsed, an invisible presence that whispered his name without making a sound. He tried to move, but felt his feet sink into the ground as if the city was trying to absorb him. He woke up startled, panting, his heart racing. For a moment, he didn't recognize his own room. It was as if he was still there. The dream persisted in his mind, as real as the waking world. Then he realized something even worse. He could no longer remember his mother's voice. Entire memories began to fade, dissolving like mist at dawn. The outbreak had reached him. The world was beginning to realize the seriousness of what was happening. The number of infected was increasing exponentially. It was impossible to determine how many had already dreamed of the Blue City. Governments tried to downplay the crisis, attributing the cases to an epidemic of extreme fatigue, but it soon became clear that something much deeper was at work. It wasn't just exhaustion or collective delirium. It was real. Social networks were the first to be affected. Any mention of a dream was deleted in a matter of minutes. Websites trying to document the phenomenon were mysteriously deactivated. But the virus was already out of control. It didn't need technology to spread. All it took was a conversation, a story, a memory. Doctors and psychiatrists reported that the patients affected had something in common, a growing disconnection from the real world. It wasn't just a lack of attention. It was as if their consciousnesses were split between two planes of existence. Diego tried to fight the symptoms. He drank absurd doses of coffee and forced himself to stay awake. But it was no use. The dream was already inside him, and every night it became harder to distinguish between what was real and what was part of the Blue City. He began to see fragments of it even when awake. Reflections in the windows showed streets that didn't exist. The silence of the early morning seemed to be carried by a distant murmur, as if something was trying to call him back. The reports became more disturbing. People who slept next to their loved ones woke up alone. Entire towns began to report unexplained disappearances. In hospitals, patients who fell into a coma never woke up. Their bodies remained alive, but their minds were no longer there. That's when Diego received the call that changed everything. His sister, Laura, had been found in a catatonic state. She only repeated a single phrase, "They're calling." From that moment on, Diego knew that this was no longer a journalistic investigation. It was personal. If he didn't find a way to stop whatever was happening, there would be no one left to wake up. Time was running out. The collapse was inevitable. The streets emptied. Telephone lines and TV broadcasts became silent. The few who were still awake wandered like ghosts through cities where the lights were still on, but the inhabitants had disappeared. Hospitals were abandoned. Offices were empty. Airports and highways became desolate landscapes. The whole world was asleep. Diego couldn't help it any longer. His dreams were getting longer. Sometimes he woke up believing that the blue city was reality, and that wakefulness was just a nightmare he needed to escape. He joined a group of survivors looking for answers. Everyone was on edge, struggling to stay awake, sharing theories about what was happening. Some were absurd, others frighteningly plausible. Then they came across a secret laboratory. Inside, scientists had tried to study the phenomenon, but none of them resisted. Bodies lay on tables and chairs, breathing but absent. Among the scattered documents, Diego found something alarming. A theory that the virus wasn't killing people, but transporting their consciousness to another place. A transition to a new state of existence. And Diego realized that it would soon be his turn. Diego was tired. The weight of the sleepless nights was crushing him, and he knew he couldn't hold out much longer. The abandoned laboratory where he and the other survivors had taken refuge was plunged into a sepulchral silence. The last records left by the scientists indicated that there was no cure, no solution. The Blue City was more than a dream, it was a destiny. The few who still resisted sleep were disappearing one by one. Some simply fell into a deep sleep and never woke up. Others, in a last act of desperation, willingly gave themselves up, accepting the call. Diego saw Laura disappear before his eyes, her body motionless as her consciousness dissolved to the other side. He no longer had the strength to resist. Perhaps there would never be a way back. With heavy eyes, he sat in front of one of the screens in the laboratory, revisiting the records of scientists who had tried to decipher the phenomenon. In one of the video files, a man in a white coat spoke in a low, hesitant tone. What we call the Blue City may be more than an outbreak. It could be a transition, a new state of existence. The problem isn't what's there, but what we leave behind. Diego paused the video. He finally understood. There was no solution because there had never been a problem. The Blue City wasn't a disease, it was an invitation. But who or what was behind this call? And more importantly, if everyone was going there, who would be left in the real world? He didn't want to fight anymore. When he closed his eyes, he felt himself sinking, slowly being pulled into a place he already knew. The impossible streets, the buildings that defied logic, the omnipresent blue light. And on the horizon, a figure was waiting. Something, or someone he had never been able to see before. The silent presence that always watched him in his dreams. When he finally approached, he realized that the figure was himself. His waking self, the one who had resisted, was looking at him with a mixture of understanding and resignation. Diego realized that, in trying to fight the phenomenon, he had divided himself. His body was in the real world, but his consciousness already belonged to the Blue City. The entity in front of him smiled, or maybe it was just an impression. The Blue City was not a prison, but a passageway. Diego felt overwhelmed by an absolute peace, an understanding that transcended words. And then the real world faded away. On Earth, the last awake human finally fell asleep. And on the infinite horizon of the Blue City, Diego took his first step as part of the new world. Share your opinion in the comments, and tell us what you think about this dream city. If you liked this story and want to explore more stories like it, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. The unknown still has a lot to teach us.